Cool, let's do it. So yeah, welcome everybody to the first annual, well not annual, but first ever Serverless Office Hours. We wanted to basically start a kind of live Q&A session for our community out there to basically like interact directly with the serverless like core team. So I'm really pumped to get this kind of kicked off. And yeah, welcome everybody in the chat and everybody watching the video after the fact. But let's go around real quick with some intros. So Austin, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us what you do and who you are.
Cool. I'm Austin Collins. I'm the CEO and founder of Serverless Inc. and the creator of the Serverless Framework, formerly known as JAWS, which I started about 1.5 years ago. Since then, we've raised some funds and we've grown a fantastic team. I think there's about 12 or 13 of us now. And by the way, this is just, there are only 3 of us on this call, but there are 2 other stars in particular on the framework team who are not on this call. That's Islam and Philip. Maybe we'll get them to join subsequent calls, but we thought we'd try it with only a few people first.
For sure. Flo, who are you and what do you do?
So hey, I'm Flo. I'm the CTO of Serverless, and I'm responsible for engineering team, and specifically on the Serverless framework, responsible for the direction of the framework. So the guy who should be able to answer all your questions regarding the Serverless framework. Yeah, so happy to help out in any way that I can here today.
Nice, awesome. And I'm David Wells. I am. I guess I'm the developer evangelist. I do a lot of things, but yeah, that's, I guess, my title right now. And I'll be the moderator for this office hours. We're going to go through a bunch of questions that people have asked. If you do have questions, tweet them at GoServerless with the hashtag AskServerless, or post them in the forums or what have you. Twitter, we'll see it like immediately, so probably that's the best bet. But yeah. So before we jump into questions, though, we just had a pretty awesome release that happened yesterday. Flo, do you want to go through some of those kind of key things that came out there?
Absolutely. Let me just start the screen share here. Where is it? There. Share. So I think you should be able to see.
Yep, got it.
The screen now and the release, and I'll show a bunch of the features as well. But so basically, we've now, so after our 1.0 release, we now started to switch to a biweekly release cycle for a couple of separate reasons. But most importantly, we don't want that features, especially features that get contributed to us from the large group of external contributors that we have, ever get stuck in kind of like a PR hell, or like where it's merged to master but never released. And we want to put ourselves in a position where we ship constantly. In our opinion, like, shipping is really important. And so we definitely want to make sure that we release new stuff to you guys all the time.
Yeah.
So with this release, we have done a couple of things. And with that in mind specifically, we've done a few things in this release to make sure that while we can push a lot of stuff, we don't unnecessarily or break anything that you guys deploy. So, for example, one of the features that we released this release is version pinning for a service. And so the main idea behind it, and I'll show you that for now in the docs, but the main idea is you should be able to set a specific version for the framework that you want to use. And then the tool will simply not run any command. And at the moment, that includes the help and version command, which we're probably going to change. But generally, it shouldn't run any command at all when the version of the framework that you define in your serverless.yaml doesn't match the version that you're currently running. So you can just in your serverless.yaml say, hey, I want to run with 1.0.3. Or so you can see I want to run with 1.1 or whatever. And that really helps you because you can be sure that none of your developers deploys with a different version than is defined in the service, and you consciously upgrade to the next level, to the next deployment step. So that's a feature that we included specifically so we can move really fast, but especially for all of you people out there that have larger services, are in larger companies where you have to make really sure that that stuff works, and we don't deploy something that you didn't expect. You can make sure that you don't deploy with breaking changes or anything like that. So that's one of the features in terms of just stability. And then we included a couple of things that really make the development experience a lot better and a lot easier. First and foremost among them is the new Invoke local plugin that we have. And for that, let me just switch into my CLI. And I think I have to change the screen share here to actually be able to show my CLI. 1 second. So your entire screen. So now I think that should work. So you should be able to see my CLI here, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so
increase the font size a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Cool.
That works. Cool.
Yep.
So I'm just running serverless because I'm running it from my local checkout of the tool. I use app-bin serverless. I can do invoke, and invoke is the normal invoke that we have, where you invoke the function on the deployed system. So for example, in this case, I do invoke hello. So I invoke it actually on Lambda in this case. And you'll see in a second that it runs and that it runs the function and reports back.
And for anybody not familiar with the dash F, that's shorthand for dash function, telling it which function to run.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. And there we go. So we executed it on Lambda, high serverless office hours participants. Now we can do the same thing local as well. I can just do serverless invoke local, hello, and then it'll run the same thing on our local system. And
so what exactly is that, like enabling people to do flow?
So the nice thing there is that obviously in your development cycle, there's a couple of different ways to develop things. So for example, you want to make sure that you release, before you release something into your production system or even into your development system, you want to run it locally, you want to test the functions locally, and even before you jump into actually unit testing. One of the things that we're going to do more in the near future is really help you with how do I set up my unit testing in a good way from the beginning. But that just allows you to do a couple of tests where you say, okay, invoke local with something, or even if to run your function locally on your system. At the moment, it's only Node.js functions. In the future, it'll be others as well. So here, for example, what I'm doing is in the handler file of the hello function. In this case, I'm just logging the event that we hand in here. Because I invoked it without any event data, it's printed undefined here, as you can see here, because that is empty. And then we have like this output code, as you can see here. But now the neat thing is, as is the same with invoke on Lambda, I can also do -p and say event.json. And now you'll see that in a few seconds, it'll show that we have. And if we take a look at the event file, it'll print key value, key value, key value. So you can really test to run your application, as you can see here, this. Nice. To run your function locally, test it locally, and really get a feeling how it performs before you even start writing tests or before you deploy it into your Lambda application. And so that is just, we want to make sure that you have all the tools that you need from the earliest step of development to any later step to make sure that you can properly deploy, test, develop locally, and really have a good testing and development experience. Because with like something like Lambda and serverless and generally microservices, it's often kind of hard to really get a good development experience. It was kind of hard, especially in the past, to really have a good development experience. And so that's what we are putting a lot of effort into, to make sure that you have the same development experience that you're accustomed to in all your previous work with different frameworks and all that stuff.
It's also just about developing faster. I mean, when you have to deploy stuff to Lambda every single time, it really slows down your workflow. And a good tool, I think, should move as fast as the developer can think. And we just can't get there when we have to upload something every single time. So that's why we brought this feature back. It was in version 0, and now it's in version 1. And I think it's going to speed things up for a lot of people.
Absolutely agree. And obviously, sometimes you deploy something and something might fail. So with this release, we also introduced rollback support. So you can simply do, at first, you can say, okay, I want to get all my recent deployments. So I can do serverless deploy list. I get a list of my recent deployments. in a second. And after that, as you can see here, we can simply run rollback. And you set a specific timestamp, so you get the timestamps of all the recent deployments. You set the timestamp, and then it'll just roll back to an earlier version of your deployment. So here's the different timestamps. Here's the last one that I did. And so, for example, if I use this timestamp here, or sorry, here's on the bottom, like this was the one I did today, or these two I did today. This was a while ago. So if I do rollback -t and this timestamp, it'll roll back to that earlier version.
And that'll roll it back on AWS, correct? Not
that will roll it. Yeah, exactly. That will roll it back on AWS. So it'll use the same CloudFormation template and the same artifact that we used for that deployment to roll back. And so that's one of the ways where we can make sure that if you deploy something that you didn't intend or that has issues, you can either very quickly push forward and release a new version, or you roll back to an earlier version. And because we have CloudFormation and all the artifacts in place as of before, you can be sure that it works exactly as you expect it to work.
I think one thing that should also be made clear for people who are familiar with the old kind of Lambda workflow, which is you're actually rolling back the individual functions because each function can have a version as well on Lambda. This is a bit different from that. This is actually rolling back the entire CloudFormation stack of your serverless service, which is kind of nice because when you make infrastructure changes not related to your functions, you could roll that stuff back pretty easily. And it's not, just function specific. It's like service-wide specific. So you're rolling back, all your functions as well as the resource or the infrastructure dependencies that they have together. And I think that's pretty powerful, or at least we hope. Let us know in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's all about consistency. We want to build a tool, a framework that gives you consistency in every situation. And as you can see here now, I invoke the same function. And in this situation now, it just does go serverless, where before it printed hello serverless office hours. There we go.
Right. That's awesome. So these are like two new, like really cool features. Like I have a quick question. How if I have a feature request for the framework, or I really want something added in, how would I go about starting off that conversation with the serverless team and the community at large?
So the best place to do it is open up an issue. Open up an issue in our GitHub issue. So it depends. If you have something where like you want to get some help or get some better understanding on how to build something, run into a problem that isn't really a bug, but you want to get more information, jump in our forums at forum.serverless.com. We have a lot of people, a lot of contributors, core contributors, people in our team, but also the community help each other out and answer each other's questions. And we're really happy to see that growing and growing since the release of version 1 of the framework. If you run into a bug or have a very specific feature that you want to implement or have an idea about a feature, jump into our GitHub issues, open up an issue, describe the bug or the feature request that you have to us. And really, so we try to have a relatively large issue template because we really want to make sure we really fully understand like what the intent is behind. So any ideas, any use cases that you have, any specifics, any configuration files that you have, send us everything, and we're happy to take a look and incorporate it. And you can also see, if you look into the GitHub milestones, you can see the milestones for the next couple of releases, so you can really follow along what we're working on. And if you want to contribute, you can check out the different labels that we have for help wanted. But basically, just go into our contribution file in the main repository, and there you can see like the different ways you can contribute and how you can give us help. Because one of the important things for us is contribution doesn't just mean code. Even if you find like a small thing that could be improved and you send in an issue and somebody else can pick up that one, that's super helpful. So anything that you can come up with, anything you run into, any ideas that you have, any documentation changes, and obviously David will talk a lot about this, or a little bit more about this later on, can definitely help. So regarding the release, those were just 2 features, or 2 or 3 features that we just released. Obviously, there's more bug fixes and all kind of stuff. So check out our changelog in the repository, so under the GitHub releases, and you can see all the stuff that we're releasing now. And cool. Definitely feedback very much appreciated.
Let's move on to some shout outs. We have some contributor shout outs.
Yes.
Like we have an awesome community, people contributing all kinds of amazing pull requests and like doc updates and what have you. Who are those people, Flo, that we want to shout out this time?
So just as a stand-in for a large number of different people who contribute regularly in various different ways. In this release, special shout out to Andy Mac 4182 on GitHub, who contributed great new features, who really contributed over like a longer term at this point, and who constantly keeps pushing new and great stuff for us to merge into serverless. John McKim, who's from a great partner company of ours, who keeps contributing all the time as well. And in this release, he put in that we now have services that you can have a service without functions, because more and more people, we find more and more people who want to use serverless not just for their function deployment, but for their general AWS and CloudFormation-based deployment. Because again, consistency. They want to have consistent tooling, consistent processes all around. And so that's something that we have. Eric Erickson from Nordstrom, who has contributed regularly now to really get serverless to a point where it works great for the enterprise. So from different IAM tooling configurations and different ways, how we can make sure that you have the utmost control over what infrastructure we deploy. That's something that's been really helpful from Eric and the whole team at Nordstrom and their feedback as well. And I think, and that's one that is especially close to my heart. The next one is Doug Moskrop, on GitHub, who's been working, like he's one of those people who just comes in and refactors the code all the time. Like I think that's something like that's kind of the unsung heroes of like open source projects, the people who just go in and say like, I'm gonna clean this up and I'm gonna clean this up and I'm gonna clean this up. It's not the shiny stuff, but it's the stuff that like warms the core teams and especially my heart, because I know that we just now have a cleaner code with a couple of things that were just cleaned up, are nicer for contributors to contribute to, less conflicts, clearer code, better tests. So huge shout out for that, because it's definitely not the most sexy thing, or at least outwardly sexy thing to contribute to an open source project by refactoring. But in my opinion, it's one of the it's really one of the things that is closest to my heart and really, really is important. It makes our life so much better and so much easier. So huge props to him for that. And he contributed so much stuff, especially on refactoring. So very, very much appreciated.
Huge props to all these guys.
Absolutely.
These are some of our long-running all-stars who've been around for a while, and they've done a lot for V1.1, but they've done a lot for all the previous versions. So, these four people in particular, especially Rock, and also the other people that we might be forgetting about, but we love you too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I want to do a quick shout out to A Cloud Guru for putting on the Serverless conference over in London. Flo, you were there. I heard it was awesome.
Absolutely, it was perfectly organized, and the talks are now up. So and I think we can share those in the notes later on. But the talks are now up from the Serverless Conf, and so many great talks from all across the board: small companies, large companies, enterprise companies, about technologies, how they're using different frameworks, different technologies, how they're using the serverless framework, which really was really cool to see that people were talking, not just us talking about the serverless framework, but really people giving talks about the plugin system and others at the conf. But yeah, very, very interesting, very enlightening, great conversations that I had there. So, and yeah, I agree, Igor Guru did a fantastic job in organizing the whole thing for like 500 people, and I think it was the second time around. So
awesome.
Great work.
All right, so let's jump into the actual questions of the office hours. Enough about us and the updates. Let's jump into your guys' questions. So our first question here is from E2. Hopatussi on Twitter asks, is there an estimation on when the custom process environmental variables will be available? And this one's pointed at you, Flo.
Yep. Hey, E2. We actually met at the Serverless Conf and in a couple of years. So the thing with environment variables specifically, and why we dropped them from V1 is that with our move to CloudFormation, the whole deployment step is now one deployment where we push the CloudFormation template and the artifacts as one, basically. So that's why we couldn't do it as we did in the past with version 0, where we kind of created like an environment file and then pushed that into the deployment. We can't really do that because in the past it was a two-step process. So we knew, like for example, if you created some kind of resource, we knew that the resource was created before we actually deployed the Lambdas. this is not possible anymore because of the way we deployed through CloudFormation. And basically what we're waiting for is for AWS to release environment variable support on Lambda. And that was definitely something that we are pushing them a lot. We're telling them, giving them that feedback. I know that a lot of other people are, and I actually made some shout outs at the Serverless Conf for other people to tell them because, and in our conversations with AWS, we also know that they heard this before. So yeah, we have our plans basically as soon as AWS comes out with this feature to implement this. And yeah, I definitely know that it's something that they hear regularly. It's in our opinion, in my opinion, one of the biggest features that we're currently needing in Lambda. So I'm sure AWS is thinking about this hard. And yeah, because it will allow a lot of different things. So a lot of the direction that we're taking in terms of service discovery, service configuration, and service communication between different serverless services is built on top of environment variables. So yeah, we hope super soon. It's the feature I want the most, but at the moment I have to wait on AWS to implement environment variables to really get, because we need it in CloudFormation. Yeah.
We're hoping it comes for Christmas. We're asking Santa.
Absolutely. But you can be sure, as soon as AWS releases it, it's now everything else will be dropped and that will be implemented as first. Everybody in the team wants this, as much as everybody outside using serverless wants this as well.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so we got another question here. This one's towards you, Austin, from John Sherritt. He asked, and this is, he asked, is there any rough idea on when the beta may be ready for the serverless platform?
Good question. As many have probably noticed, we have been putting these beta sign-up forms on our website, serverless.com, and quite a lot of people have signed up for it, but we've been very light on details as to what it is. The way we think about the platform is it's basically our code name for all of the other things we'd like to do in the serverless space. Amidst the themes of serverless computing, event-driven architectures, and microservice architectures, we think that there are a ton of cool new tools that need to exist, as well as new types of infrastructure that help people abstract away complex infrastructure, prevent them from operating complex infrastructure, and just do things more easily. Now, as far as the timing as to when we're going to start releasing those things, we can't say yet. They're in progress, and you should be on the beta list. But we don't have a clear ETA. However, I will say that we do have a couple big features and even a separate product, which is kind of an experiment coming out very soon here. So I think you should watch the GitHub repo. We might not announce it. We might just kind of slip it into our GitHub organization and just see what people do with it a bit before we formally announce it. So pay attention there. But amidst these themes, serverless computing, event-driven architectures, microservice architectures, there's a lot of cool stuff here. And the serverless framework is really the beginning of that. And where it's going is, it's hard to say, but we've got some pretty neat ideas. So stay tuned.
Nice.
And just to add, because Austin mentioned that you can sign up for it, if you go to the website, there's a login, basically, or a sign up, and you'll sign up with Auth0, and then that puts you into our beta list, and you'll get all the updates. And as soon as we release something, you just head over to the website and sign in there, and you'll get everything as soon as we're ready to release.
Cool. Cool. So we got another question here from Kevin Eid 75 on Twitter. He says, I'm developing my services in Python. Is there a plugin for this runtime, or should I switch to Node.js?
So I can take this one. Basically, you should be able to you should be able to build your Python service with the current serverless. So the main idea with Serverless 1.0 was to make it completely language independent. It was pretty much language independent with 0.5 already. But we planned for the beginning that there's no specific dependencies on a language. There's a few features, like, for example, Invoke local, that we wanted to release a first version early. So we only released it for Node.js now because technology-wise, it's much easier for us to implement since we're built on Node.js. But we definitely want to implement those features on other languages as well. over time. But yeah, for Python, so if you check out the documentation, there is a runtime field that you can either set on service-wide, so for all functions in the service, or for any specific service, you can set the runtime. And so that will make it possible to switch between different runtimes, either for specific functions or for the whole service. So you should be able to use any language that is officially supported on Lambda. Is easy to use with the framework. You can just do it. You can also do things like get Go working, because it's not officially supported. We're not officially supported in the serverless as well, but there's some hacks to get around it, and we've even done them internally. But you should totally be able to use Python by just changing the runtime attribute in your provider section of the service.
Cool. And I'll also note that Node.js, I like it better, so use that instead. But no. Let's see. So another question here on Twitter is from Linus Gubinis, and I might be butchering your name. I apologize. We're going to link all these questions after the fact. But he's asking, what's the best practice to connect or disconnect to MongoDB with like a Lambda, like a stateless Lambda service? Because Lambda is inherently stateless. Like, what are some of the best practices? What are we seeing people doing when they do need that stateful kind of information?
So one of the things I think that is important to understand with Lambda as well is that every request doesn't necessarily hit a new Lambda. So there's this cold start Lambdas, and then once they're hot, they might be around for a while. So one of the things that you need to make sure is that when the Lambda is started, that you create a connection or connection pool, depending on the different database technology that you use, that is there for longer than just the request. So for example, make sure that you create the connection when loading the Node.js file or something, so that the connection isn't created every single time you run your function, and isn't created in the context of the function itself. Because when you create it outside of the context of the function, just when the Node.js file is loaded or whatever specific language you're using, it gets created once when the whole system starts. So the way it works, the first time a request comes in, the Lambda system starts a container. In that container, they have a small wrapper around for every language. And then they load your specific code and execute it. That only happens once, unless your code goes to sleep regularly. So yeah, just make sure that the connection is only created once, and you make sure that it's only created when loaded. And then it should be reused for the next connection. So connection pooling is typically what you want to do. I'm not that big of an expert for MongoDB, but I think from the little experience that I have is that connection pooling should be totally possible there as well. And yeah, also for more details, you can either check out or also post in the forum, and then we can go into more details on that. I know that there have been questions around this specifically. I think even about Mongo, definitely about like Postgres and others. So that's a place that you can check out. And yeah, post your questions with more details, then we could go into more details. But generally, anything that is like a resource, like a database connection, created outside of the context of the function when your code is loaded, so that it's around for every request after that. So it's not just a new request for every single time the Lambda runs.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good advice for doing a whole bunch of stuff, like creating connections, but also any sort of initialization method that may introduce some type of latency. If you can get that outside of the context, outside of the actual Lambda function, you should get a significant performance bump. Cool.
Yeah, and it's also like if you're familiar with MongoDB, take a look at DynamoDB, like Amazon's offering. It's very similar. No SQL setup, but yeah. Okay, cool. So another question here by the same person, but it's a good one, so we're going to ask it. Is it recommended to run transpiled ECMAScript 6 code on Lambda, or should you stay with the default Node version, which I believe is 4.3? That's a good question. I want to know the answer to that as well.
So that depends on like what the main goal is of doing that. Basically, so if it's about speed or minimizing or anything like that, it's not as likely to yield you that much like performance gain on a backend system like Lambda or generally backend application. So it depends on what exactly your goal is. If you just basically want to use ES6 and then compile it down to 4.3, and just so you can have like the latest language version, there's nothing speaking against it from a performance perspective. There shouldn't be really any difference. One of the downsides with any kind of either minification, code transpiler, or anything like that is that some of the error messages might not be as obvious where the code is, because if some kind of change, maybe some variables get changed, some code gets changed, and then you see like an exception or something, and then it's kind of a little bit harder to get to where exactly that code is. That also depends on like how good the transpiler does. But so generally, if you want to have there's nothing necessarily speaking against it from a technical perspective. I don't think that it should give you any performance gains or losses on Node. Obviously, you should like test that. So you should have the same code with one or the other version. But generally, it shouldn't really make a lot of a difference. The main difference is in development. It might lead to some problems in terms of the exception handling or seeing where exactly stuff happens, and it's not the exact same code as you run potentially.
So Flo, follow-up question there. If the code, the Lambda function itself is significantly smaller, like would that run maybe faster?
It shouldn't really make that much. So I mean, the difference should be negligible probably. So because the code itself, the difference, which like things like minification, which make totally sense on like the front end because you download the same code and load it a lot of times, doesn't really get you a lot in a backend application where like the code gets loaded, even like in the V8. So the code is loaded once, then it's compiled down to binary, like the just-in-time compilation, and at that point, like it doesn't really change anything. And so if you don't have a lot of code starts, you don't load the code many times, and it's not downloaded like into a Lambda many times. So the difference, and there's a very, very long discussion about this in like a GitHub issue. So there's a GitHub issue about like the optimizer plugin, and into that in detail. But basically, like optimizations like minification doesn't have that much upsides in a backend application because you don't there aren't millions of people like accessing that and downloading that and restarting that all the time. Like where in a website you might have to like parse it again, like just-in-time compile it again, the same JavaScript code like a million times to millions of people. That doesn't really happen in a backend application because you just start it and then it's just there in memory and then everything happens. So that's the main goal. You can totally do it. I would measure everything. Like measure it, see if there's any difference, and if there's no difference, you have to decide if it's worth it or not on your end.
Yeah, two follow-up comments on that. That's something that we do need to dig into more, and we should come out with those measurements. But I will say that there is one company in particular who is doing over 1 billion invocations every single month, and they did say that when they shrunk down, they were using version 0 with the optimizer plugin, but they said that when they shrunk it down, it reduced their costs actually because they had such a high volume of invocations that, and I can't remember how much, but they said there was definitely a difference there. So I don't know how well they were measuring it or anything like that. It was just a casual conversation. Additionally, I'll say that if you use something like Browserify or Webpack, I'm not super familiar with Webpack, but another benefit is that it can concatenate all the code your functions are actually using and shedding all the stuff that might be in your node modules or any other files that are unnecessary to your code. And the result of that is that you get a much smaller file size, which is what we're talking about on the cloud, whether or not that can improve performance or not. But it can also improve your workflow because if you're deploying to Lambda constantly, you have to upload every single time you want to see if something's working in the actual production environment. And that upload takes a while. So another benefit is, if you're reducing the file size of your Lambda, uploads happen a lot faster and your workflow, your development workflow happens a lot faster. So one other benefit of that, there's upsides, there's some downsides, debugging, everything is concatenated into one file. The lines are all changed. It might be minified. It's harder to understand, what the issue is in Lambda if you do that route. But yeah, we have a lot of fans who are doing both. So
Yep. And also, so there's, as you mentioned, that there's the way you can exclude and include specific files or paths in serverless. So, for example, like by default, we just package the whole folder. If you have like 10 folders or dev dependencies that are in the same node modules, those will be packaged as well. So one, and as Austin already said, like one very obvious one is like excluding all dev dependencies or deleting all dev dependencies before you do a production deployment, for example, just to make sure that everything is really like very compact. And we store the created artifact in the .serverless folder in your local folder, which we ignore by default. But you can just unpack that zip file and check out what all the things that we pack, and then optimize that from there. So all of that stuff, like that makes it different, especially at scale. Like it does just depends. Like if you have just like an hour, it probably won't make a huge amount of difference. If you have a billion invocations, then obviously like every bit helps. So yeah, definitely measure, and then optimize.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to look into that. I'm going to do that personally, especially with Webpack 2. So they have a new feature called tree shaking that like just eliminates all the dead code. So yeah, I think you would be, at least even if it was just a win on that upload path, I think that would be cool. Awesome. So we got another question here from, let's see, from Tim Heckler. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And he asks, I'd like to expose real-time streams in my serverless app. What would you recommend? Something like Fanout.io?
Have you looked into Kinesis? Sorry, Austin, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, well, I just have a few remarks to say. I haven't looked at Fanout.io yet. I've heard about it. And we do have a recommendation. I mean, first off, check out Kinesis. I'm not sure, who you want to expose the real-time stream to. Is this something that's, just being exposed to within your organization, your company, or across other teams? Or do you want to expose this to third parties so that they can actually build like event-driven integrations into your application, like maybe a strategic partner or an end user? So Kinesis is good, I think, for the former, for like doing something, within your AWS account or within your organization and stuff. Outside of that, exposing events easily, via some type of data stream is harder with Kinesis, I think. And once you just bring in AWS and all of its identity management complexity and all that stuff. I will say though that join the beta, sign up. Because we're doing a lot of thinking in this area, and it sounds like you are too, Tim. Anything you want to add, Flo?
Nope, that's exactly what I wanted to say.
Cool. So another question from Linus. Linus is just like blowing up our question line. He asks, does a bi-weekly release schedule mean that I need to recreate my projects every 2 weeks if I want to stay up to date?
No, absolutely not. So we definitely, and so there's two things. Like first of all, the version pinning, and also we really try to make sure that we don't release. When we release a breaking change, we're also switching to Center. So we have semantic version everywhere. So like when we release a breaking change, then we'll jump to version like 2.0. Generally, the approach that we take is we don't want to release a breaking change from version from one version to another without giving you advance notice. So for example, what we did in the current release is we added a warning. At the moment, if you deploy a service, the logs, the Lambda, the CloudWatch log groups aren't actually created by your CloudFormation template, but they're implicitly created by your Lambda function. From this release on, you have the option to include those in your CloudFormation template, but that would be a breaking change, so you have to do something to make this work. So what we're doing is we're giving you the warnings now, every time that happens, and then in the future, in a couple of releases, we'll remove that, set that behavior as automatic, and then it will actually be a breaking change. But no, you don't have to do anything specifically. For the most cases, you should just be able to deploy your service. Sometimes you might have to change something because we don't support this in this way or another way, and some behavior might change. But in general, we're going to give you warnings about that going further. So yeah, no, should just be able to deploy, keep deploying. Again, stability, continuity is very, very important for us going forward.
Yeah, those are our big themes right now, and because we've had a history of doing some breaking changes, from version 0 to version 1, and a lot of that, by the way, has been prompted by us just chasing a moving target, and that is Lambda and API Gateway. These services are evolving so rapidly, CloudFormation in particular, that it's been hard to keep up and figure out what the best practices are, and then implement those within the framework without doing breaking changes. But part of our reasoning for adopting CloudFormation was so that we don't introduce breaking changes as much at the end of the day. And also your serverless application is just a CloudFormation template at the end of the day. You could just export the CloudFormation template. So it's a bit safer. There's no framework lock-in, really. But yeah, very much focused on stability. And with the adoption of strict semantic versioning, it will be clear if we do have to break something in the future when that's happened. So that should help too.
Cool. So we got another question here. This one was over on the forum. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for this one. Okay, guys. Whoa, infinite. That was cool. All right, so this one comes from Frank. Sorry, Frank, I don't know your last name, but Frank basically is like, says he likes our new docs setup, and he's asking like what we're actually using to, do our documentation. So I just wanted to address that real quick and show how people can actually contribute back to the docs if, they're looking for something to contribute. It doesn't necessarily need to be code. It could be like helping us improve our docs because there's always room for improvement. But yeah, so Frank, the way that we're doing that is we're using a static site generator for our site. It's called Phenomic.io. Highly recommend checking it out. It's based on React and React Router. And yeah, our entire site is open source. If you want to check that out and clone it down, anybody's free to do that. But the docs, like this goes along with our theme of basically trying to improve the developer experience. So one of the things that I was having trouble with updating different docs was like, where are they located? So one of the things that I added, so if you go into any of the doc pages and you see something that might be out of date or what have you, there's this handy little link in the right-hand side that you can just click on and it'll pop open that markdown file and you can edit it and submit a pull request right then and there. So if anybody sees something, a typo or something that's worded a little strangely or could be better, or you have a code snippet that you think would be beneficial to the community, by all means, yeah, contribute back and we'll love you for it. But that's kind of the answering that docs question from Frank there.
And we're using Algolia for search. Which
yes. So
great search service.
Whoops, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So yeah, so we're also the doc search. So Algolia, if you have an open source project, they'll do this for you for free. I think it's under community.algolia.com or something. But a lot of open source projects are doing it where they'll index the docs for you and give you that super, super fast search experience. But yeah, so anyways, cool. Next question.
And just one point on the questions. I'll go over the Twitter questions later on and answer all the ones that we haven't been able to answer in the call due to time limitations. I'll make sure that they are answered, or we'll make sure that they're answered. So if anybody's listening and you have another question, keep them coming and we'll answer them.
There's a good one in the chat right now about managing static file hosting with S3.
Okay, yeah. You want to read it off?
Yeah, Greg is asking if serverless can manage static file hosting on S3, like manage the serving of a single page application at a specified API gateway endpoint. This is something that we very much want to get into. We're definitely going to move in this direction and make it super easy to host front-end stuff. It'll probably take the form of plugins, serverless framework plugins to help you do this, because we're trying to keep the core lightweight. But this is an interesting direction where we want to go in it, and I think David's already started some work. And we also had a S3 static plugin in version 0, and I think it was pretty widely adopted but we're going to revamp it for version 1, and I think that's what David's been working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's another point about like our site. Definitely check out the repo, because it's a static site. At the end of the day, we're not putting it on S3. Personally, we're using a service called Netlify, but we could very well put it on S3 as well. But we're just serving static HTML files to people visiting the site, which kind of goes along with this whole mantra of like, let's go serverless. Let's make everything. Let's remove all the servers that we can. For like the benefit of our users, right? So if you're serving something from a CDN, it's going to be much faster than if it's coming from a server. And if our major Black Friday sale, it can't take down our site because it's on a CDN basically. So we definitely want to kind of keep promoting this idea of like you can do a lot with static websites, more so than you could in the past. And it's kind of like they're mislabeled. Like I wouldn't think about it as static. If you go to our site, we have a whole auth setup. We have that doc search feature. There's a lot of dynamic pieces because it's built with it's a JavaScript front end basically. Once you actually get to the page, the JavaScript single page application loads up, and you can navigate around, and it feels kind of smooth. But so we're working. I'm personally working on a plugin for this. I'd love to hear some feedback if you want to connect with me about it.
And David, from when we last spoke about this, you were going to introduce support for Netlify and some other static site hosting services aside from S3, which is cool. Yeah. But these other services are really rocking, like Netlify, Surge, right. And everything. So I think that would be interesting.
So S3, so with S3, you kind of have to manage a lot of it yourself. Netlify kind of puts a CI/CD like system in. So if we push a change to the master branch of our site repo that I just showed, that'll automatically rebuild the site and redeploy it through our CDN. Super amazing. Really like them. The other one that I like for like smaller one-off things is surge.sh. But yeah, so the plan is to kind of make a generic static site plugin, so you can kind of choose your provider. And Islam on our team did a lot of work on this on the version 0.5 plugin. So I'm trying to port that over. But yeah.
Cool.
There's also something like through custom resources, you can also like set some of that up, but there's a lot of work that you'd have to do on your own. But yeah, if you post it in the forum, happy to help on that. And we can go into more detail there, and we can give you some hints on like configuration for that, how to set it up and how to get it up and running.
Cool. So let's see. So we went through most of the questions. Let's see. Does anybody have any other questions in the chat that they might want to address?
I think we're almost good to wrap up here, David. It's been, I think we're almost at the hour mark.
Yeah.
So we don't have any other questions. I think, Flo, if you want to just talk briefly about the next milestone.
Totally.
What's in there?
Absolutely. So yeah, you can check out the milestones in our GitHub repository. So on the GitHub issues and then the milestones. So for 1.2, the big goal for 1.2 is, so basically the release in 2 weeks, is that we do more IAM support. So basically, we lock down the infrastructure a lot more, so that by default is really only what is necessary. Like only what is necessary is available to the different functions, and then also give you more controls over which other thing to expose and how to set up your IAM roles. So for example, something that got contributed by Nordstrom is you have custom roles for each function, so you don't have like one role per service, but custom ones. And then we'll also do some optimizations on the serverless CLI itself. So we want to make sure that it's fast. Want to add some tests there, and then some internal optimizations as well. And also, we're now starting with our move towards our 5 main goals for the next 6 months, which are multi-provider support. So we're definitely working with different providers. We have pull requests for different providers open, and we have a first alpha implementation of Google Cloud Functions that will release as a plugin, a separate plugin, very soon. The second one is security, which we're starting to address now more and more. Obviously, it's not that the system is insecure. It's just that we want to make it harder and especially give you more controls when and how to open things up. And then the other points are service composition, better documentation, how do I lay out my microservices, how do I set them up, how should they connect to each other. Service communication, how can I call one other function in another service from this function, how can I raise events so others can listen to it, and how do I do communication in a large group of microservices. And the last one is service discovery. I have a DynamoDB in this service. How does my service know about that? Which is, for the most part, environment variables. So environment variables are a big part of that, but not just environment variables. So better DNS support, Route 53 support. That's all coming over the next couple of months, and we're doing first steps in that direction now. So yeah, definitely check out the milestones. Give us feedback on the milestones, on different issues that are in the milestones. Yeah, let us know if any questions come up and if we can help with any of them.
Yeah, and that sounds fantastic. For me, there are like a couple things that we're going to be introducing just in like a week or so, just as small experiments, and we're going to slip them quietly into the GitHub repo, the GitHub org. So pay attention there. Again, I don't know if we'll announce them. We just want to put them out there and just to our community, the people who are kind of involved in the framework day to day, just to see what they think and stuff. So definitely pay attention. Exciting stuff is happening, and we're almost done.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So I guess we'll wrap up there. Before we wrap up, I want to, if you guys enjoyed this office hours, or if you have any feedback, please, by all means, let us know. This is kind of an evolving process, and we want to kind of give you guys the inside scoop on what's happening. So you're not, totally in the dark. Not that you are right now, but total transparency, radical transparency. So feel free to reach out to any of us, and let's chat.
And we will be at reInvent, by the way. I'm going to be there. Nick on our team is going to be there. So if anyone's there, just ping us on Twitter. We love to meet up and hang out, grab some beers or something.
All right, cool. All right, so we'll end it there. We need a catchy sign-off phrase. We'll leave that for the next one. But all right, until next time, serverless folks.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one, everyone.